Chapter 4. Rob was startled awake. He'd had to pull over and get some rest reluctantly. At around 1:30 in the morning his sleep debt caught up with him. No amount of caffeine could have helped. He'd pulled off of I-5 and onto Stewart Road, which was free of traffic at that hour. Thick woods were on both sides of the path of pavement. He parked off the road, beneath the dense trees, and felt oddly safe in his seclusion. He wasn't sure if his mind was just tricking him into feeling safe, so he would allow his body a much-needed break. At that point, he didn't care much to consider it. He pulled the lever for the seat and sat up. He could have sworn he had heard something. Maybe his dreams had just chased him back to the land of reality and were still lingering. Then he heard it again. His already rapid heartbeat thumped harder. It was the sound of something crashing through the woods. The sound was getting louder as it was getting closer. Rob went to turn on the engine, but his fingers just pinched air. The keys were not in the ignition. There was a final, loud crash, which subsided with the sounds of twigs snapping and foliage being mildly disturbed. Rob then remembered that he had put the keys in his front pocket to guard them in his sleep. He straightened his body as much as he could and fished for them. His fingers snagged them, but he had difficulty pulling them out. His waist was still bent a little in such a way that his fingers couldn't quite get enough leverage to pull the stiff keys out. His tight jeans weren't any help. He leaned to the right and was able to straighten his leg out just a bit more. It was just enough. His middle finger hooked the keyring up to the first knuckle. He pulled it out and jiggled the car key into the ignition. He was shaking all over and his hairs were standing on end. The car started right up and he immediately turned on the headlights. He saw something through the bushes in front of him. It was one of them, one of the demons. It was just standing there, staring at him with its eyeless head. The tall greenery mostly obscured it, but its bruise-colored skin revealed its shape. He swallowed, hard, while his mouth was agape and his throat locked up. It hurt. Unmindfully, his left hand grabbed his neck and tried to rub the pain out. He was too stunned with disbelief to just drive away to safety. It was not going anywhere either. He squinted. Sure, he was distorting shadows, or his eyes were just inserting the all-too-familiar image. Before he could be sure, it moved. It lowered its head and crouched slightly. Rob had no trouble moving then. He put the car in reverse and put the pedal to the floor. The wheels spun at near top speed, but the tread wouldn't grab the loose soil. Rocks and gravel flew loudly into the bottom of the car. Dust billowed up all around him, giving the glow of the headlights a definite shape of beams that widened the further they got from the grill. The illuminated dust was all he could see, and his fear further intensified. He cried out in frustration. It could be anywhere. He expected the car to die, the dust to settle, and then see it standing, or crouching rather, right beside his door, looking, with no eyes, in at him before it broke the window and was in the car with him. Through all of it, a part of his mind was still questioning the reality of it all. Then the tires made friction with the ground. The car went flying backwards, uncontrollably, off the tracks he had made when he had driven in. He crashed through shrubs and snapped some limbs off thin-growing trees. He tried to steady the wheel, but when the car connected with the poorly paved edge of the road, the wheel spun crazily of its own accord. In a second he had crossed both lanes of the road, and the car jumped backward off the other side, and was stopped when the back bumper collided with a thick tree trunk. He heard the wheels grinding, and took his foot off the gas. It all seemed to happen in slow motion. He tried shifting the gear into drive, but the stick would not budge. "No fucking way!" he cried tearlessly. He heard a loud snap and looked across the road at the bushes that were just beginning to settle. There was a feeling of inevitability to the whole situation. He could not get away. It would come, stepping out from the concealing plant life and into the headlights and into plain view. It couldn't, though, could it? They couldn't be in the light. Then again, didn't they have to come out of the walls? Maybe the car would just die completely and it would walk around and come up behind him. Hell, maybe the headlights would die too. Nothing had to make sense. He was all alone, and if he didn't survive, he couldn't tell anyone that it had all been unfair because logic and rationalism had gone all topsy-turvy. He wouldn't be able to demand a do-over. Maybe they could just come up from the soil and get you. The floor on the ground was one of 6 sides to a room. Maybe it didn't just have to come from the 4 sides. Maybe the earthen floor was the wall to the underworld. That ruled out camping in tents to escape it all, as he'd casually pondered. It didn't seem likely that they would come through the fabric of a pup tent to get you, but a log cabin seemed plausible, as much as anything could be in the scenario. If they could come out of a log cabin's wall, then why not just the raw tree trunks themselves? If not, then they could still maybe come out of a local restroom or forest ranger facilities wall and find you and get you before sunup. He decided once and for all to stay in a place with electricity. Light was still the best weapon. Or maybe nothing but an animal was out there, and the whole thing had just been a fucking head trip. It had been several more seconds and nothing else happened. He slowed his breathing, but his eyes continued to dart around frenziedly. He began to feel sure that nothing was there. He took a deep breath and looked at the automatic stick. He wondered why it wasn't budging. He expelled his breath and leaned his head back against the headrest and marveled at his own stupidity. In all his panic, he had forgotten to step on the brake before trying to put the car in drive. "Stupid!" he said with a harsh emphasis. He stepped on the brake and the stick shifted easily into the drive slot. However, when he took his foot off the brake, the car did not idle toward the road as he expected. He stepped on the gas, and when the car's RPMs got almost to the 4 line, the car at last lurched forward, freeing the back bumper from the tree. He winced at the loud crunching sound. He turned right back towards the freeway. The car seemed to be running fine despite all the abuse it had suffered. He did not look into the rearview mirror. He did not trust that his eyes would not see it, standing in the road, looking red in the rear lights. When he passed the sign saying he was approaching the north and south entrances to I-5, he slammed on the brakes. The car came to a screeching halt. There were still no other cars on Stewart Road. He had expected to continue going north, towards Sacramento as he had been, but when he remembered his dream, he felt as if he had hit a brick wall at top speed. The dream had started with road signs and billboards speeding by. Rob had been in the stranger's head again. He watched everything through a slightly murky haze. Usually, when he was tapped in, he could see clearly, but that time it was like bad reception. Still, he'd been able to make everything out. Some of the incidents were shown to him in flashes like quick memories. He'd seen the stranger's fresh remembrance of a kill of a guy named Leon. He'd gotten to a road cut through a mountain. He'd seen random flashes of dead and broken bodies. Everything had finally steadied. He felt like he had caught up with him in time by getting a quick course of everything he had missed since his last mind meld. Along with the visions Rob was having, he felt the further progression of absorbing the killer's thought processes as well while in that state. Sometimes the thoughts were visual, overlapping what the eyes were seeing. Other times they were a demented, rambling inner monologue. Sometimes other voices joined in from inside the madman's head, voices of all ages and both sexes, speaking English and gibberish, but all of them sounded malevolent. He rode along those thought currents and mostly understood what was going on in the lunatic's head. Somehow Rob could decipher even the most abstract input that came his way. He'd been trying to just get back to I-10 West. Leonard Skinner's Sweet Home Alabama had been blasting. He'd been tearing off strips of beef jerky to subdue his appetite, but he knew it would not work for long. He wouldn't last one more day. He needed someone, and he knew someone was just up ahead. Rob had been thinking and feeling that way about his own personal flesh. He'd just gone and restocked on goods. The station he'd wanted to go to had been wrapped in yellow police tape and had 2 cop cars out front, but there had been another station just about a mile further up the road. The dinky Toyota had turned out to be quite reliable. His headlights had shown on a body lying in the road. It was the truck's previous owner. He had seen his old truck up ahead. No one else had come along on Commercial Road. He'd started getting all worked up. He'd started feeling primal, almost feral. He'd bared his teeth. He'd pulled the truck up beside the body and put it in park. He'd turned off the engine but left the key in the ignition. He'd wanted to keep the radio on. He'd opened the door and gotten out. He'd left it open and the door's speaker played Don't Fear the Reaper out into the night, the music echoing off the mountain wall. He would not have been able to wait. He'd bitten into the guy's right arm, between the elbow and the wrist. He'd ground his teeth back and forth through the chewy flesh, and then he'd clenched his jaw and pulled his head back while he pushed the guy's arm away with both hands. A mouthful of skin and fat and a piece of muscle tore free. He'd swallowed it quickly, barely chewing. Blood leaked out of the jagged hole. He'd taken 2 more bites of the same arm, rolling up the sleeve to get to the juicy bicep. He'd done the same to the other arm. He'd felt great and powerful like a wolf devouring a rabbit. He'd inhaled the rich scent of the blood. Overwhelmed by his ravenous intoxication, he'd ripped his teeth through the guy's throat. While biting through it, he'd shaken his head ferociously back and forth, freeing more bits of meat and congealing blood. He hadn't known how much he had consumed by that point, but he hadn't cared. His hunger had not yet been satiated. He'd torn his fingers through the corpse's left pant leg and yanked it down to his ankle, exposing a fatty thigh. He'd bitten into it and reveled in the sensation of blood smearing his face. He had not been a wolf anymore, eating a measly rabbit. He had become a ferocious lion hollowing out a zebra. He never went for the gut anymore, though. One time, insane with hunger as he'd been sure he'd craved a girl's intestines to be between his teeth. The stomach skin had tasted fine, but when he bit into her lower intestine, an awful taste and texture had filled his mouth, and a powerfully rank odor had filled the air. He'd vomited up all that he had eaten of her, and seeing the puddle of blood and bits and stomach acid had made him dry heave. He hadn't been able to continue with her. After how revolting she had turned out to be, if he'd had the power to go back in time, he wouldn't have even fucked her. Later that night he'd found a clean-cut college student stumbling around a local pub, and he'd killed him and eaten him instead, sticking only to his arms and legs. He still liked to bite into their throats, too, but not in a faggy, vampiric sort of way. He was definitely not a giver of life, and certainly not eternal life. He was a life-taking motherfucker. On rare occasions, he liked to peel the skin off their faces and dangled the jiggling strips of flesh over his open mouth and slurped them down. That reminded him more innocently of being a kid and how much he had loved to play with his fried chicken skin at the table. When he'd been sure he'd had more than his required fill of the businessman on the road, he had sat back in the middle of the pavement and took several deep breaths. He'd wanted to be sure to keep it all down. He'd focused on Fleetwood Mac's twangy gold dust woman. After a short while, he'd gotten up and got back into his new truck. He'd had to get going. Rob had felt that the killer was not sleeping at all anymore, so the killer had then not been updated on where Rob was, or more importantly, where he was not. The son of a bitch was still headed for Sue and Michelle's apartment. The dream had ended when his visitor in the woods had woken him up. The last thing Rob remembered was that the killer was continuing towards I-10 West to meet up with I-5 North, and he knew he didn't have a whole lot farther to go. He'd watched his approaching enemy alternate hands on the wheel while licking each one of his fingers clean of drying blood. When he'd seen the west entrance for I-10 was when Rob had been startled awake. Rob took the south exit instead. He had to make it back before the killer got to L.A. Rob understood one more thing from the dream. He knew exactly how much danger he was in. He had no idea what to do. He was taking his dreams at face value, and he had seen that nobody was even remotely able to begin fighting back. He had even seen one man shoot him, and the bullets had barely left any marks, and if bullets didn't harm him, then what would he possibly do? There was no point in hitting up some army surplus store to stock up on guns or knives. Maybe a grenade or a rocket launcher would at least incapacitate him. Who the hell would know? Was there even a weakness to be discovered? Rob felt the killer and the demons were connected the same way he himself and the demons were connected. He had wanted all his questions answered as best as they could be before he went up against the killer, but that didn't seem to be possible to pursue in the urgent state of things. He didn't know how long it would take to get back. He didn't even know exactly where he was. His trip had been broken up so many times and Sue's odometer didn't work. It just stayed at 385,062 miles. He knew where he had been going, but that would have to wait. He would let nothing stop him from getting back. He would only make stops for gas. He would drive as fast as he could, but he would just have to wait and see how long it would take. He didn't even know how far he had come. He knew he had not made much progress in his first 24 hours away, but he was going to pick up the pace after he had gotten some rest and allowed himself to come to terms with how he had left Sue and Michelle, and after he had come to terms with what he was going to face. He allowed himself just those first 24 hours to go slow, and he was thankful that he had. He could otherwise have easily been at least as far as San Francisco by then, and then he would definitely be too late. Rob wasn't a religious person, but he considered himself something of a spiritual one. He didn't see how he could not be, since he grew up with otherworldly beings all around him, influencing his whole outlook on even the trivial aspects of life. He called his higher power the voice instead of God. The voice was also a good listener. He prayed to it when he really needed to, and it usually answered. He would get a feeling telling him what to do, rather than getting a response audibly, but he was always grateful to get any answer at all. Whenever he did what he felt he was supposed to do, things had a way of ending up all right. He was always very careful what he asked for. He made sure to only ask for things he truly needed, things that his survival itself depended on.